Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to my podcast, Leveling the Playing Field. So today we're going to talk about something kind of controversial, but very relevant and typical in today's society for people to argue about over Thanksgiving dinner. We're going to talk about transgender and intersex athletes in the Olympics. Let's start with something everyone can agree on. Sports are supposed to be fair. That's the whole point. And when people hear about transgender athletes in the Olympics, their gut reaction is typically, that's not fair. Now, I'm not here to shame that reaction, but I'm here to slow it down a little bit because right now, what the International Olympics Committee's policies aren't actually fair either. Currently, the IOC decides who competes where based on testosterone levels alone. Their cutoff for women's events are 5 nanomoles per liter, and that's it. And which, if you're uneducated, that sounds scientific until you realize testosterone doesn't actually work like that. Athletic performance isn't solely based on how much testosterone is in a person's body. Strength, speed, endurance, things that matter in Olympic competition, they depend on things like muscle mass, bone density, hemoglobin, lung capacity. Testosterone influences some of those things, but it's not the only factor, and it's definitely not the best one to use on its own, especially when testosterone naturally varies across all bodies, including cisgender women. Take, for example, cisgender women with differences in sex development, or DSD. These are women who just happen to produce more high levels of testosterone naturally. And it's not because they did anything wrong, or they took anything, or they're just like a glitch in the matrix, but under current real rules, they're flag tested and sometimes told they have to medically alter their bodies just to be able to compete in the Olympic categories they already belong in. Caster Semenya is the most well-known example of this, but she isn't the only woman this has affected. Now let's look at transgender athletes. If a transgender woman transitions before puberty, she uses puberty blockers followed by hormone therapy, her body's going to develop in a very different way than someone who goes through male puberty fully. Studies show that they contribute to lower muscle mass, lower bone density, changes in fat distribution. Basically, her physiology ends up much closer to a cisgender woman than to a cisgender man or boy. But the rules don't really account for that right now. At the same time, trans women who transition after puberty have been excluded entirely from women's categories, not because their testosterone is too high, because they keep it under the threshold and control it with hormones, but because puberty already shaped their bodies in ways that hormones can't fully undo. And that's the key point that people miss. Puberty matters more than adult hormone levels. It sets the foundation: bones, lungs, muscle distribution. Once those changes happen, they don't just disappear and they can't be undone. Pretending testosterone alone solves this problem is like using a ruler to measure weight, and it's just not correct. It's the wrong tool. So here's the solution I'm proposing, and honestly, it's not that radical. Instead of forcing everyone into two categories that clearly don't fit reality anymore, the Olympics should use 4: male, female, male to female, and female to male. You might be asking, why does it matter for female to male since people don't have controversy over that? But it's all a matter of fairness and inclusion for the athletes and for everyone who's interested in watching the Olympic Games. Now, with that being said, within the male and female categories, there would also be subcategories for athletes with DSD because their biology also affects performance in real and measurable ways. This isn't about excluding anyone, it's about grouping athletes with comparable physiological development so competition can actually be fair. Under the system, cis women compete against cis women, and transgender women who transition before puberty would compete in the women's category, and those who transitioned after would compete in the MTF category, and so on. There's no invasive testing, no public scrutiny, no pretending biology doesn't matter or doesn't exist. And athletes with DSD aren't punished for being themselves or existing, but they're able to compete in categories that reflect their bodies without being forced to suppress them. Now, some people or your grandparents might push back and say, but there are so few of these athletes, why would we change everything? It costs money, blah, blah, blah. But fairness has never been about numbers. We already separate athletes by weight, height, disability for the exact same reason, which is to make competition meaningful and fair. And practically, it's not complicated. Athletes would disclose their sex at birth, gender identity, whether or when they transition, and any relevant medical treatment. No forced hormone suppression, no invasive exams. just transparency and clear categories. At the end of the day, fairness in sports doesn't mean pretending everyone's the same or identical. It means acknowledging the differences we have and that the ones that actually affect performance and building rules around those and not around fear or politics. If the Olympics are supposed to represent the best that the globe has to offer, athlete-wise, then they should also represent the best that modern science has to offer. And right now, all science can be telling us is that we can do way better.